Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Wendy Griffith. Today, Iran threatening Israel once again, promising a response that will make Israel regret striking the Persian regime last weekend. And that comes as there's a new international push for a Palestinian state right next door to Israel. Here at home, a major Supreme Court ruling on whether or not the state of Virginia can take non-citizens off the voter rolls. And the good news of the gospel is alive and well as 1,000 young people come to faith in Jesus at a revival event at a major American university. These stories and much more today on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
And we begin in the Middle East. Just days after Israel's attack on Iran, Iranian lawmakers talking openly about striking back at the Jewish state, which could come in the next several days. And one high-level source telling CNN their response to Israel's strike last weekend will be, quote, definitive and painful. And now there's also a new international push for a Palestinian state. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Members of Iran's parliament are promising an attack on Israel would be painful.
They should expect a response that will make them regret everything. They will not dare act like this again.
Hezbollah's new leader, who's hiding in Iran, is also making threats. In his first speech, Naim Qassem threatened Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. But he also said Hezbollah is ready to accept a ceasefire if conditions are right.
If the Israelis decide to stop the aggression, we say that we accept.
On that front, Lebanon's prime minister says he's hopeful negotiators are able to, quote, have a ceasefire within the coming hours or days. A leaked proposal brokered by the U.S. calls for Israeli troops to be out of Lebanon within a week. Hezbollah would reportedly honor UN Resolution 1701, a peace deal it's ignored for decades. Lebanon's army would enforce 1701, but Israel could take action against future Hezbollah attacks. However, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly believes it will be better to physically remove Hezbollah from the border than depend on a written agreement on paper. In Riyadh, Saudi Arabia hosted 90 nations and international groups for the first ever international meeting to work out a so-called two-state solution. A majority of Israelis believe a two-state solution would pose an existential threat to Israel. The head of UNRWA was at the Saudi gathering.
The two-state solution is the internationally agreed framework.
Israel just banned UNRWA because of its links to Hamas, and hundreds of its employees are suspected to be tied to the terror group. Israeli Cabinet Minister Amichai Chikli tells CBN News how UNRWA has indoctrinated generations of Palestinian children.
This is the Palestinian ideology. This is UNRWA ideology. And by the way, it's also very, very important to understand the jihadist ideology, to train the kids to hate, anti-Semitism, to teach them that the war against the Jews and killing the Jews, that is the most important thing on earth. And this is also a part of what we saw on October 7th.
Chikli believes the legislation passed by the Knesset this week puts UNRWA in its place after October 7th.
It is so important because we say we do not recognize the legitimacy of this organization anymore. An organization that was leading terror attacks, that was part of the massacre of October 7th, will have zero legitimacy for the state of Israel, and there will be zero collaboration and recognition for UNRWA.
Chris Mitchell joins us now from Jerusalem. Chris, wonderful to see you. How is the Israeli government reacting to Iran's latest threats?
Well, Wendy, they're warning Iran right now, and they're saying that they didn't strike, and that strike just a few days ago, many targets that it could have. And they also saying they didn't hit the nuclear sites or the strategic oil facilities of Iran, and the next strike will be much more painful. Reportedly, Wendy, there's also, I've heard reports that Israel may launch a preemptive strike, and the timing is key because the U.S. election next Tuesday really is the calculus for not only Israel, but Iran and many of these nations in the region.
Chris, what measures is Israel taking against Iran right now?
Well, against their main proxy, Hezbollah, they're severely degraded their arsenal. Many of the launches have been, rocket launches have been taken out. They've taken out many of the commanders. Before the war, Wendy, the IDF anticipated that Hezbollah might be able to fire at least 1,500 missiles per day. There's only been about 200 per day. That's much more than Israel would want, but far less than what they expected. Also, there's less coordination between Hezbollah and Iran. But we also hear that Iran may be restraining Hezbollah by from firing its probably the most important part of its arsenal, those precision-guided ballistic missiles. Many analysts are saying right now that Hezbollah is at its weakest point since 1982 when it was founded, and Israel really needs to exploit this weakness.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, yesterday we talked about the possibility of a ceasefire with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Those discussions still ongoing. Is there concern Hezbollah could just use a ceasefire to regroup?
I think that's the concern of many people here in Israel. And reportedly, I've heard because of this leaked draft of a potential ceasefire that Netanyahu's come out and said he really wants to eliminate Hezbollah on the ground. He doesn't trust in that resolution that was passed back in 2006. It hasn't worked for 18 years. So the question is, for many, why would it work now? What a ceasefire would do now, Wendy, would really save Hezbollah so it could regroup. Right now, the IDF, Israel, has destroyed much of Hezbollah's banking, their military, and their key infrastructure, especially right on the border. So this could be an opportunity for the Lebanese to finally take back their country from Iran. Some people have asked the question, would the U.S. Army would have stopped at the Rhine River before entering into Nazi Germany and agreed to a ceasefire? And I got this from a Lebanese source, Wendy, that it really took Hezbollah 20 years to build its infrastructure. Israel has been destroying it in almost 20 days. It's a huge victory. It's exposing Hezbollah to the world. And right now, what the Lebanese have been praying for many, many days or many years is being answered. Hezbollah is desperate for a ceasefire, and they're trying to preserve what they already have. But many Lebanese would prefer that Israel would destroy Hezbollah completely so they can reclaim their country and take it back once again.
Wow, great point, Chris. Well, once again, the international community pushing for a Palestinian state. How will the Israeli government respond to that?
Wendy, it's dead on arrival. And right now it's been on life support ever before October 7th. But October 7th really killed this idea in not only the majority of Israelis, but also, remember, the kibbutzim on the Gaza border. These were some of the most pro-Palestinian Israelis in the country. They would take many of these Palestinians from Gaza to the hospital. They employed many of these Palestinians. But now they feel like they were betrayed by the same people who they provided jobs for, took them to the hospital. So Hamas itself is anathema to Israel. The Palestinian Authority, the other potential, partner for a two-state solution, is not acceptable. And that's why there's a proposal right now from former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. It's gaining popularity. Gordon Robertson spoke with Ambassador Friedman about this. The whole idea is to declare sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, give rights to the Palestinians who want to live in a Jewish state. And after all, the point here he's making is there's 2 million Arabs that live right now peacefully within Israel.
And lastly, Chris, with UNRWA's ties to Hamas and its indoctrination of Palestinian children against Israelis, is Israel likely to enforce its ban against UNRWA operating in the Jewish state?
Yes, I think it will, Wendy. UNRWA's really lost all credibility within Israel. They have 90 days from the vote to go ahead and enforce this. They talk about the indoctrination that's been going on for decades. We've interviewed a man named David Bedin. He's been a voice crying in the wilderness for many years. He's exposed their curriculum. For example, they lionize and praised Dalal Mughrabi, the head of one of the worst terror attacks in Israel history. She's celebrated in Palestinian textbooks and classrooms, and they don't want any more of this kind of indoctrination here in Israel.
Chris, as always, great reporting. Our CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell in Jerusalem for us. Chris, stay safe. We are praying for you and our team there in Israel. God bless. Coming up, we're going to take a closer look at Iran's potential to strike Israel, possibly even before Election Day here in the U.S. Tuesday. We'll hear from analyst Alex Traiman of the Jewish News Syndicate about this possible threat when we come back.
This election night, with a country divided and America's future hanging in the balance, go to a place you can trust. CBN News. CBN News presents an election night special with live coverage. Get live updates on each of the campaigns, plus reliable analysis on the shifting balance of power. Watch the CBN News Election Night Special, Tuesday night, November 5th, beginning at 8 on the CBN News Channel.
While the world awaits Iran's response to Israel's retaliatory strike, the question arises, will Tehran strike Israel before next week's U.S. presidential election? Appearing on this week's episode of The Global Lane, Jewish News Service Jerusalem Bureau Chief Alex Traiman says Iran still has capabilities to do great harm to Israel.
While Israel took out some of the missile production capabilities and also took out air defenses, Israel did not take out the existing caches of long-range missiles. So there is an estimate that Iran has as many as 2,000 to 3,000 ballistic missiles that it could launch at Israel. And so far, it has launched about 300 of those ballistic missiles. They saw in the last attack that they were able to almost overrun the missile defense systems. Israel did intercept many of those missiles, even most, but many of them got through. As many as 30 reported to have hit one of Israel's major Air Force bases in the south, although not doing significant damage. Iran could decide to launch as many as 500 or 1,000 ballistic missiles simultaneously at Israel. There would be no way for Israel to stop all of them. And they could also decide to target civilian infrastructure instead of military infrastructure, which could potentially harm thousands, if not tens of thousands, of Israeli civilians.
Well, that would be an escalation. And Israel's response to Iran's response, with most of the air defenses gone, as you'd mentioned, is a strike against nuclear production facilities on the table? What's the likelihood that Israel will target them next, and why?
Well, the importance of Israel's last strike on Saturday was that they took down just about all of Iran's missile defense and air defense systems, meaning that Israel can now operate freely over Iranian skies. And they also indicated with their last strike that they are aware of all of the major strategic targets. And so it was a first strike and done in such a way to allow Iran the choice as to whether to escalate. If they do, I do believe that Israel is prepared and has prepared for multiple contingencies, including a major Iranian escalation, and they would, I think, respond in kind. There's no way that Israel is going to allow a situation between with a war with Iran to linger or turn into some kind of a war of attrition. I think there's a good chance this could escalate very quickly, and Israel will know what to do in that situation.
Well, they're still dealing with the northern front. A new leader has been named for Hezbollah. Most Middle East watchers cannot understand why anyone would want to step into that position after Israel has taken out the Hezbollah leadership and their replacements. Your thoughts?
Well, whoever's the replacement is already high up on the list of Hezbollah leadership, and it was probably already high on Israel's list of targets. But there are people that are ideologically committed to this cause. If there was no ideological commitment to destroying the Jewish state, you would have seen many more Hezbollah operatives and Hamas operatives surrendering or just laying down their arms and stopping the fight. There could be a ceasefire at any moment with a Hezbollah surrender, with a Hamas surrender. But there is an ideological component here. This is a religious war, and Hezbollah and Hamas, they're operating on behalf of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So they're going to continue attacking Israel, and Israel's going to continue doing what they have to do to file down the capabilities of Hezbollah and Hamas until they're no longer a threat to the Jewish state.
Alex, we're hearing there are defections from Hezbollah. What are you hearing?
I've heard from soldiers that are on the front lines that while there are in fact firefights and there's been a sort of consolidation since the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, that many of the Radwan force and other commanders in Hezbollah that were expected to be fighting against Israel, that they've moved back and they're not attacking right now. So I think that the situation in Lebanon is different than that in Gaza. In Gaza, Hamas rules the entirety of the Strip, and the people are very supportive of Hamas. In Hezbollah, you have this foreign terror organization which is clawing its way through the political system and trying to take more and more control over the country. But Lebanon, is split between Shiite Muslims, of which Hezbollah is a Shiite organization loyal to the Shiites in Iran. You have Sunni Muslims in Lebanon. You also have nearly a third of the population Christian, and they want their country back too. So there's not necessarily overwhelming support within Lebanon for Hezbollah.
Okay, Alex Traiman, Jewish News Service Jerusalem Bureau Chief. Thank you, Alex, for sharing your time and insights. We appreciate it.
Gary, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Gary. Also, on this week's episode of The Global Lane, we'll hear from one analyst who says the deep state and government bureaucrats are transforming the U.S. into a socialist nation, and what the Supreme Court's decision upholding Virginia. I'm not sure. Okay, and you can see it all on The Global Lane. That is tonight at 8 o'clock on the CBN News Channel. That is Eastern Time. You can also see it on the CBN News app or on YouTube. Still ahead, what the Supreme Court's decision upholding the integrity of Virginia's voter rolls could mean for the upcoming election and lawsuits in other states. That story when NewsWatch comes back. The Supreme Court has handed the state of Virginia a major pre-election victory. The ruling allows Virginia to remove non-citizens from the voter rolls. There are already more than 100 election-related lawsuits filed in several states. Legal experts say the court's decision is significant because it shows the High Court is committed to protecting voter rolls. Here again, CBN's Gary Lane.
In a 6-3 ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court blocked a federal court decision that would have prevented the state of Virginia from removing 1,600 names from its voter rolls. The U.S. Department of Justice sued the state after non-citizens and other individuals were placed on an inactive voter list within 90 days of the election, a violation of federal law. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin argued the state regularly removes names from its rolls each month when it receives information from the Department of Motor Vehicles indicating an applicant's non-citizenship status on driver's license applications. Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares claimed a temporary victory, insisting that the state will continue to protect the rights of legal voters.
But it should be two standards: easy to vote, hard to cheat. That's the standard we have in Virginia. That's why this is a brilliant winning for not just upholding the rule of law, but I just say common sense.
On CBN's Faith Nation program, Cedarville University political science professor Mark Caleb Smith said he doesn't believe the Supreme Court stay will significantly affect the outcome of the presidential vote in Virginia.
Virginia isn't considered to be one of those really close states. If this were happening in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, potentially up to 1,600 votes could be pretty important, maybe. In Virginia, I think that's probably unlikely. But it does at least suggest the Supreme Court may be willing to engage in a way that maybe people didn't think would happen even as little as a few days ago.
Republicans and various other groups have filed 100 similar lawsuits in other states. In Texas, they're suing the Harris County Registrar for not removing 562,000 voter names from voter registration rolls. Harris County includes Houston, which is the 5th largest city in America. Attorney Jared Whitfield filed the lawsuit on behalf of his clients. He believes that the Supreme Court's decision, while temporary, will have an impact.
It sends a very clear message that the United States Supreme Court is concerned about voter rolls or voter rosters to make sure they're accurate. You can only commit the voter fraud when you have a roster that is incorrect. So it's so important in order to maintain the integrity of our elections to make sure at that starting point, at that voter roster, that it's accurate and correct.
While the Supreme Court's focus on voter rolls is significant, this is not the conclusion of the Virginia case or similar cases. Courts across the country are preparing to hear hundreds of election challenges in the coming weeks and months. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Lord help us. Well, coming up, God is still at work on college campuses here in the U.S. We'll bring you a look from another revival event at one of the biggest universities in the nation when we come back.
Introducing a brand new way to start your morning, the CBN News Quick Start Podcast. Each weekday morning at 7 a.m., get quick highlights of the day's important news. Then an in-depth analysis that goes beyond the headlines. Insights that matter to people of faith. Discover how God is moving around the world and here at home. Find the CBN News Quick Start Podcast on iTunes or wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts, because truth matters. Download the CBN News app. One place for all of your news. Breaking news alerts. Watch CBN News Channel Live. CBN News, because truth matters. Get the CBN News app today.
A move of God continues sweeping college campuses in America. The latest happening at the University of Florida, where 1,000 young people put their faith in Christ at a Unite Us evangelistic event earlier this month. We witnessed God move in a new way, Unite U.S. organizer and evangelist Tony Pruitt told CBN News. Unite Us reports that even members of the University of Florida's football, basketball, and volleyball teams were baptized. Since the first event at Auburn University just a year ago, more than 50,000 students from 300 universities have reportedly attended the outreaches. Wow, that is a big crowd. That is awesome. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Let us know what you think about the stories you've seen today. Just email us. It's at newswatch or newswatch@cbn.com. Reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or X, formerly known as Twitter, of course. We hope you'll join us next time. From all of us, have a great day.